Well, welcome, friends, to the show today. And I have a few questions for you. Do you have a teen that is unmotivated? They sit in their room and they're on their phone. And then when you ask them about that homework or that paper that's due, they they're not doing it. And no matter what you say, no matter what you do, if you try to punish them and take something away, or you try to motivate them by offering them some sort of reward, nothing changes. And you just feel so powerless and frustrated. Well, if this is you, you are in great company. So many teens struggle with this. And I also have great news because we have Dr. Melanie McNally with us today. And she has worked with hundreds of adolescents since 2013 as a clinical psychologist and brain coach. And she is also the author of two books, The Emotionally Intelligent Teen, Skills to Help You Deal with What You Feel, Build Stronger Relationships, and Boost Self-Confidence, and Helping Your Unmotivated Teen, A Parent's Guide to Unlock Your Child's Potential. Dr. Melanie has emerged as a leading voice in clinical psychology and teen mental health. She has a deep commitment to guiding Gen Xers both towards, or not both, but toward their most authentic selves. And she's also been recognized nationally for her expertise and has been invited to the White House to discuss the importance of teen mental health. And she's appeared all over the place, Huffington Post, Parents Magazine, Business Insider, and so much more. But perhaps most importantly, Dr. Melanie understands teens, and she has this gift. She's been on the show before, and I can't wait for you just to get to hear from her again. She has this gift of helping us to understand our teens and the issues that they face in today's culture and how we can actually support them to become their best selves. So welcome, Melanie. I am so happy. Thank you for being on the show with us today from way up in northern Michigan.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for that introduction. That was so generous and kind. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And I really do appreciate you. And you have such a way of articulating what is true for teenagers and your experience of working with them. And you probably don't even know. I mention you all the time. I really, in my teachings, and I talk about how the things that teenagers tell you that they often won't even tell us, that they're struggling with when it comes to dealing with their parents and how we can help them. And so being unmotivated for teenagers, it seems like it's a real struggle today. I don't know, exactly why that is. Can you speak to why that might be?
Yes. So, it's from more of like an anecdotal perspective. I really started to notice the shift in teens right around, I would say like 2015, 2014, where I started noticing that they were coming to my office prior to 2014 or 2015. They would come to my office with difficulties with anxiety, just feeling like anxious, not sure how to manage it. And then I started to notice this big shift where they would come to my office and they would talk about how they were bored all the time and they didn't want to do much, and everything just bored them. And at first, I wasn't sure what was going on. And now, in hindsight, I know, and especially when we start to look at the research as well that supports it, is that we have handed them something as addictive as cocaine, which is a phone, and we have expected them to be able to manage this addiction all on their own. And what that has led to is a lot of teens who now are very much addicted to their phones and scrolling, and it has become this like digital regulation tool where they don't know how to self-regulate, they don't know how to manage any feeling of discomfort because they have this device right there, so they can just instantly start scrolling. They can get on Instagram or TikTok, and they can start texting their friends or send a snap or whatever. And they don't have to deal with the discomfort that they're experiencing. And that lack of, regulation means that they also don't know how to deal with things when, they're bored or when they feel a lack of motivation. It's just easier for them to just start scrolling. So I firmly believe that the technology we've handed them and expected without a lot of resources or support has led to the issue that we see now with the lack of motivation.
Gosh, it is such a struggle. It is such a battle. And moms are always saying, I just do not know what to do with this. And how to, it's like on one hand, it's their lifeline, and that's how they connect with their friends. And on the other hand, it's like what you're saying, where it's so easy to go immediately to your phone and even get a dopamine hit from it, something that's going to make me feel better. But then is it really making them feel better? And that's, I think, the tricky thing too, because then they're seeing things that they're not really truly satisfying or what they really need. And do you believe that's why we're seeing also the depression and then compounded anxiety on top of it?
I think it's one of the causes. I don't think it's the only one. I think there's a lot of things that, especially in American society, that our values have shifted, and there's a lot of things that have kind of created, an increase of anxiety and depression in teens. So I think it's one of many, but I think there are other things as well that are contributing to it. And I do want to point out too, it's not just teens who are addicted. It's oftentimes the adults as well. And I think that, I'll hear this from the teens that I work with all the time, because teens will flat out tell me that they are spending way too much on their phones. They will check, we'll do screen time checks and see how long they're on there. And they are just like absolutely mortified when they see how much time they're spending on Instagram or TikTok. And they know it's an issue. But then at the same time, they're talking about how their parents on their laptop all night, or they're trying to talk to their parent and their parent will not put down their phone to even make eye contact with them. I've had adult clients where during the session they're getting text messages on their watches and
Oh,
they're, checking those because everyone is feeling this need to constantly be connected. So I do think that it's not just that the teens are struggling with this, I think their parents are as well.
yeah. It's just, and it's so easy to do, and we have to become consciously aware of when we're doing it because I think we don't even think about it. I mean, even my grandson was saying to me, I was doing something, oh, I was watching a show with him and a movie, and I got, like you said, a couple pings on my phone. And I looked at it and he was like, Grammy, like what? And he's 8. You're not watching the show with me. And even that, it's like we want to watch a show together and it's be with. But now, even watching a movie, if it gets a little slow, then we take a break, we look at our phone, like no boredom. Okay,
Mm.
this movie's a little bored now, so I'm going to check my emails. And so it's constant, it's
Mm.
constant. And then I'll be like, I don't fall behind in my work. I better keep checking. So it causes constant stress also.
Yeah, and I think there's such a value shift that we can all make where we can decide, like I've actually added a disclaimer to my emails. So when I send out emails to people, and they get an automated response letting them know, hey, I might not respond to you right away. And I really value time away from work and time away from my devices. I hope that you can respect that, and I hope that you do the same. So if this message finds you at a time when you're doing something else, don't feel like you have to respond right away either, because we do need to all kind of shift this constant need for like connection and that I have to respond all the time. And even, with the example of having the phone when you're watching a movie, where I've worked with parents of setting some parameters where
Yeah.
phones get turned off at night, or they get put away in the kitchen at a certain time and they're turned off, or when you're all doing something together, phones are in another room. Like, put barriers between yourself and the device so that you can truly be present, because it allows your brain to
Yeah.
get used to the slowness that we get in real life versus that quick constant hit that happens with technology. We want our brains to acclimate to that slowness. I mean, I've even had clients where I've like prescribed sitting and staring at a blank wall for 15 minutes every day, because I want their brain to get used to no stimulation, because we're in such a culture of like constant stimulation.
I love that. And I even do it for a living. And I tell that story on myself because it's really easy to slip back into that versus,
Mhm.
like you said, I'm going to put my phone, like, be mindful, which I know you teach so much on mindfulness. Be mindful, put your phone away, don't pick it up, and have that family time. And I've seen your email, and that's a good charge for me to do, like, inspires me because it's just setting boundaries around it for ourselves to take care of ourselves. And then our kids see us model that.
Yes, because yes, and that's exactly what I wanted to emphasize, is that as a culture, we've shifted so far into technology and using it for everything and relying on it for everything. And when we can start modeling that healthier behavior, that's going to trickle down to teens and, the kiddos in our lives. Because really, how can we expect them to be able to tolerate boredom or discomfort if we ourselves as adults, if we can't even do it? That is such an unrealistic expectation to put on them.
So, what I hear you saying is rather than focusing on our kids being on their phones 24/7, maybe we need to start with ourselves first and start thinking about what are some of the things, limits that we need to put on ourselves and modeling that for our kids.
Absolutely. And I even talk about that in the book, where you are looking at first at yourself as a parent, and what are some of the things that maybe have just become habits and they're just kind of normal for yourself around technology or phone use. And then what changes can you start making in yourself before you start getting your kids to do those things. So you do it first, and then once you have those habits in place for yourself, now you can start working on the rest of the family. Or you can start doing it all together as a family if you have teens or kids that are at an age where they understand that, like, okay, we're all going to work on this together and this is why. Then you can even just all start doing it together. But if, as a parent, if you're not willing to do it, it's really unfair to expect your kid to do it too.
Yeah, this is so good. Like, yeah, it's so good. Like, it's so much easier to focus on our kid. Like, okay, they're not doing what they need to be doing, but hey, look at what I'm doing over here. I've got this huge pile of paperwork on my dining room table that I'm not doing, but I'm wanting to motivate my kid to get whatever they need to get done. So it's easier to look at them. So yeah, just a great thing to really for us to think about. So there's something that you start talking about in the beginning of the book, and it all starts with one thing. You say this is like the most important thing that we can ever do as parents, and everything then needs to fit into that. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Oh my gosh, I don't.
Because it's, you say we got to listen.
Oh, yes.
I put you on the spot. I hadn't put that, but that, you always talk about that. That is like our starting place.
Such wise words.
I know that's what you, so I'm sorry, because we're talking about motivation. You have so much to say about that, but we have to be listening. And if we have our phone, then, if we're looking at our phone when they're trying to talk to us, we're not listening.
And listening, I feel like, has people don't realize the importance of listening. And also, a lot of people don't realize that it is a skill that you have to learn and build.
Yeah.
I work with so many people where they'll tell me that they're a great listener and they're so good at it. And it could be a friend, or it could be just someone I'm in like a consultation, like a colleague where I'm in a consultation group with them. And then I'll see in the group dynamic where other people are talking and they're just waiting to be heard. They're just waiting for their turn to speak. And, they're not necessarily hearing what anyone else is saying. They can't wait to share what they need to share. And I'll see this often in the dynamics with teens and parents where I can tell the parent is not listening to the teen at all. They just are wanting to correct what the teen is saying, or they're wanting to jump in with an example of why what the teen is saying isn't true. And listening really is a skill where we have to fully pay attention to what someone else is saying, not just verbally, but also non-verbally. And there should be some pausing where we're absorbing what they're saying before we actually respond. We want to just sit and like let it sink in and then we respond, because that shows true listening. And when we can't do that, when we're just like jumping in really, really quickly constantly, that might be a sign that maybe we're not really listening to somebody else.
Yeah, it is like learning a new language. I used to lead these with a couple other women, these listening groups where you just practice. That's all you did is practice listening. And I had been there, and my husband will say, "You're not listening," or one of my kids will say, "You're not listening." And I work on it all the time. But it was almost laughable how it was a listening group, how hard it is to do. And we don't realize how we're thinking about wanting to say something really valuable, really important, and here's an opening where I can give my kids some advice or some words of wisdom. And then we jump in there, and then they feel frustrated and they don't want to talk to us because we're really not listening to them or trying to get a word in, a teachable moment. So, yeah. So that's why is that so important when it comes to motivation? Why start there?
Because if we can't hear what a teen or anyone, if we can't hear what's truly important to them, first of all, how are we ever going to be able to help them? How are we going to be able to help them build self-awareness? How are we going to be able to help them get on the path that they want to get on? Because if we're so focused on our own internal thoughts when we're talking to someone else or listening to someone else, then we're going to maybe get them on a path that we want to get them on versus the path that really resonates with them. And we know when it comes to motivation, motivation's made up of three skill sets, essentially. It's made up of drive, grit, and goals. And we need to recognize the drive, what a teen is passionate about, what's their purpose. We need to recognize if they have grit, do they have the ability to stick with something even when it gets hard or boring? And then do they have the goals? Do they have that clear direction on what they need to do? And if we're not listening to them talk about what their interests are, or what they did that day, we're going to miss out. Like, which area can I help them in? Where are they really struggling? What's hard for them? And especially for a teen who may not show motivation or who may really be struggling, we want to hear what they're talking about in their school day so we can start to pick up on, okay, like my kid isn't so into sitting in a classroom and having to be still. That sounds like that's really hard for them. But then I notice how excited they get when they talk about talking to their friends or when they talk about this specific project. Like I notice that they like their energy amps up and they start talking really fast. And so that's something now I can start to build on with them and I can work with. But if I'm not listening because I'm just sitting there, so focused on the fact that your teacher is saying that you're not sitting still or you're not being quiet, I'm going to miss out on all of this other really valuable information.
Okay, this is great. All right, we're going to pause here because when I think this happens a lot with parents, happens with me too, even with older adult kids and my grandkids, they talk about maybe you know they're not listening in class. Maybe you've heard from the teacher, you know they're not doing well. And so the moment that they start maybe talking about that, then the temptation is to jump in and want to fix that piece. And we get fearful. I think it's based in like an anxiety. We got to fix this. We got to do something different. So we listen, but how does that benefit us to see where they do light up, and like what can a parent tell themselves, well, to help them when they know their kid maybe isn't paying attention in class and that's hard for them. Do you know what I'm trying to ask? Like, where do we go with that?
Well, I think it's recognizing where their strengths are and understanding that like brains are all so different. And when it comes to learning, there isn't a right or wrong way to learn. And unfortunately, a lot of school systems are designed for one particular learning style. And and it makes sense, they have to, teach a lot of people. But it doesn't fit for everybody. And it can be really challenging for somebody to sit still or to have to listen to just someone talk at them, where there's certain people where they're much more of a hands-on learner, or maybe like I need to get up and move. That's why I have a desk that's adjustable, because I can't just like sit all day. Sometimes I need to stand. And it's the same way for kids where they need to move their bodies a lot of times in order to be able to absorb information. So when a parent starts to notice that, okay, maybe the sitting part is really hard for them, but I know that there's certain elements of this material that they love and it absolutely resonates with them. How could I help them figure out ways to still learn that information in a way that works with their learning style? So you're just kind of paying attention because maybe the teen lights up when they're talking about their friends and they love being with their friends and they're very social. So maybe they need to be in a study group for that particular subject. And so you're kind of combining interest or a strength with something that's really hard for them because they have to sit still throughout all of history class. So, okay, maybe they need to be in a history study group with some friends, and maybe that's how they're going to learn that information better.
I love that you talk in your book, your study, like there's so many. I just actually led a workshop in my membership around like study skills, and I did so much research. And then I'm reading your book again, and I'm like, this is filled with so many ideas of things that we don't think about, because a lot of times it's just kind of use the Pomodoro method, Pomodoro, the timer, which is a great thing, right? But your approach to this is really getting to know your kid and understanding like what their strengths are, what they feel passionate about, because that's where the open door is. That's the window, so to speak, into their heart and their motivation, versus us like trying all these things, which aren't bad, but it's having an understanding of your kid and how they can get excited. And there's a real connection you make in that book of like intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And will you explain that as well? Because I think that's important to understand the difference.
Right. Yes. So intrinsic motivation is where it comes from inside of us, essentially. So I'm going to be motivated by my purpose or my passion, whereas extrinsic motivation is external. So it comes from outside of us. So maybe I'm motivated by making money or getting a certain score. And so first of all, adolescent brains do respond differently to external motivators than adult brains do. And so oftentimes that's why sometimes like it's easier to get a teenager to do something if you add like some money to it. Whereas an adult, if you say, I'm going to pay you 20 bucks to do this thing for me, they're just going to stare at you. So teens are wired a little bit differently to respond to extrinsic motivators more than adults are. And there's nothing wrong with that. Because some parents will say, I don't want to attach this external reward to everything because aren't I just teaching them to only care about that? And it's like, well, sometimes in the beginning, you got to get the ball rolling. And if that's how you have to get things started, that's perfectly okay. If you want to attach some money to something until, if especially if you have a kid that can't identify what their passions are. Maybe they've been dealing with depression, or they've been struggling and maybe they're really not sure. Maybe their only thing that they enjoy is being on their phone or playing video games, and you're trying to find something else. Then yeah, maybe you pay them for attending different clubs. And it's just to get the ball rolling because you're trying to get them to start seeing what else is out there. And then eventually, maybe they find a club where it's really fun, or there's somebody there that they like and they connect with. And now they actually want to go because it's more aligned with their intrinsic motivators, where they feel like they belong, or maybe they find purpose. I once had a teen where once she started going out and picking up litter with a club, then all of a sudden she felt this purpose of like, oh, there's things I can do to make the world better. And now all of a sudden she's wanting to do that on her own. And so no one's having to force her to go participate in any sort of clubs because it just resonated with a purpose that she found.
Yeah, I like that. Be on the lookout. So if they're social, I do have parents who will say, well, gosh, they'll only do a certain activity if their friends are doing it with them. That's something I hear often. And you're saying, what I hear you saying is that's not such a bad thing. If that's a motivator because they're really social, that is not bad. That is just they love to be with their friends and their peers, so use it for good.
Absolutely. So use that to get them to maybe try something that's a little outside their comfort zone, but they'll do it with their friends. And maybe, or they need to study more. So maybe they study with their friends. And so you're kind of helping, you're using something that already exists for them. And now you're layering on something that's a challenge to get them to do. Or on the flip side, it could even be the reward. If maybe your teen is really disorganized and they're never on top of their school assignments, then maybe in order to spend time with their friends, maybe they have to sit down with you for 15 minutes and they have to write in all their assignments for the week, and they have to plan out their schedule on like how they're going to fit things in and what they're going to do each day. And then once they've done that, now they can go spend time with their friends.
Yeah, I love that. I actually asked my granddaughter, who's 10, she's in fifth grade. I said to her yesterday to memorize her multiplication facts. It's cute because her great grandmother is tutoring her in math. And I said, what will motivate you? She was so great. She's like, I would like tickets. I would like tickets. And when I memorize a certain multiplication, then I get a ticket. And then my ticket by Friday earns me something. I was like, wow, like I would have never come up with that. And she even said, I'll make the tickets. So I'm like, okay, there you have it. So I guess it's like finding out what motivates your kid.
Yes. And I love that you asked that question and you got curious. And so parents can do that even with teenagers, of just asking, like, okay, this is something we know it needs to get done. What's going to like motivate you to do it? How can I help motivate you? And see what they say, see what kinds of ideas that they have, because kind of like with you, they might really surprise you.
Yeah, yeah. If we can ask them, yeah, I love that. So, what are some other tangible, because you have some great ideas in the book. What are some other ideas of what parents can do to motivate their kids?
Well, first, go back to the idea of understanding how motivation is made up of drive, grit, and goals, and get clear on where it is that your kid is struggling. And so in the book, I do have some like little assessment kind of quizzes that you can go through to help identify where your child is struggling, because that really helps when you get clear. Because there can be, I've had teens that I've worked with where They know, I mean, they have such a clear purpose, they have such clear passions. They are gritty, like they are willing to do the work. But then when it comes to creating goals, they're working on like the huge, huge big goal. They don't know how to break it down into a lot of different steps. So it's like, okay, that's where we need to focus on the goal part. Whereas I have other teens where they have no clue what they're interested in. They don't know what they're passionate about. So that's where we have to start with just getting curious about what are you noticing during the day? What excites you? What are some little kind of breadcrumbs that you can follow and see where it takes you? Because maybe it's going to take you someplace wonderful. Maybe it's going to kind of fizzle out, and that's okay too. We're going to just follow another trail, but getting clear on which area they're struggling in. If it's grit, so if your kid is not able to stick with something when it gets really difficult or when it gets boring, then finding ways to help get them grittier. So helping them build that grit muscle, because grit is a muscle that can be built. So just because your teen doesn't have grit now, it doesn't mean they're going to be this way forever. But maybe you start having them do things at home where it requires some grit, something that's like tedious or it's kind of boring, and they have to do it where they can't add other elements to it. They can't add other stimulation to it because you want their brain to get used to sticking with something when it's hard and boring. Kind of like how, working through calculus can be really tedious and hard and boring if you're working through a calculus problem. Or so I've heard. I don't remember doing calculus. It was way too long ago, but I'll hear that from the teens I work with. So using it in that same light of, okay, what can I get them to stick with at home that's going to be a little bit long and boring to help them build that grit muscle? And then later, when they're complaining that something is really hard and boring, but it is connected to a passion they have, you can remind them of like, hey, I know you can do it because you just did that thing for me last week. And what did you have to do to accomplish that task last week? How can you apply that to this thing now that you really want to work on?
I love that. Yeah, that's great because you're also affirming them for the growth that you saw them have the week before, which
Yes.
I think that that's that pausing and slowing down. And they need that because usually I think it's easy to be on to the next thing versus
Right.
focusing on the growth and affirming it.
Right. Yes, you want to notice what they've done, how hard they've worked, because, even if you feel like as their parent that, okay, that wasn't that hard, they just did that one task, it may have been very, very hard for them to do. And so you really want to acknowledge that. And then you want to help them see how that skill is transferable. That is now a skill that you can use in this other area. I have an example in the book of a teen who's really into music and playing music all the time with his friends. And, he's listening to music and learning about it. And him and his friends, they get a gig at a local party, and his parents are so frustrated because he's not spending time on schoolwork, but instead seeing that as, look at all of these great things he's learning, how gritty he is. He's going outside his comfort zone. He's sticking with something really hard. He's social because he's with friends. So look at all of these things he's doing here. Now, how can we help him transfer those skills over to some of the things that he needs to apply in his schoolwork?
Yeah, gosh, that's good. Like we have to retrain our brains on what we're focusing on. Because I know research says that shows that we tend to focus on our kids' lowest grade versus their strengths.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, oftentimes. And kids do that too. They'll get the report card and their brain will just go right to the lowest grade. And
Mhm.
now they're so fixated on that instead of looking at all the other, higher grades that they received. And so parents can help by saying, like, okay, well, I understand you're upset about this grade, but tell me what you did in order to get it. And so not what you didn't do, but what did you do? And so having them identify the things that they did do, because maybe in that conversation, maybe you recognize that there were things they could have done more of to improve that grade, but you want them to come to that on their own. You don't want to tell them you didn't study enough for that class. That's why you got that grade. You want to say, okay, well, tell me what you did to get it. And maybe they're like, well, I went to class. And you're like, okay, well, what else did you do? And they're like, oh, that's kind of all I did. Okay, well, then are you happy with that grade? Are you good with that? And if they're saying no, then okay, what would be some other things you could have done now to improve it? But you're getting them to identify those things instead of just coming in and telling them.
Yeah. Not telling, moms. Hold off the telling. We're so tempted to tell. Ask instead. I love that. I love that, making that shift. And what I also like that you said, they are not going to be this way forever. Like having a long view that these are skills that they're developing. And I think we get impatient with them versus just understanding that this is a process, like just like it was for us of coming, and we're still working on these things as adults. So we kind of have to remind ourselves, I think, of that truth.
Yes, a lot of parents forget what it was like to be a teenager and what maybe they even struggled with themselves and what was really hard for them. I love to remind my sister of what she was like as a teenager. When she's hard on her teen kids. And because we forget, and we
Yeah.
hold them to such higher expectations. But also, yes, it is not going to last forever. I cannot tell you how many times I have seen teens and young adults mature almost like overnight, where something just happens, like everything starts connecting and they just mature and grow in such a way where it's almost like their brain has a growth spurt. And all of a sudden, they're making different decisions and they have different self awareness. So remember that when you are giving them the support that they need and you're giving them some autonomy, letting them fail and make mistakes so they can grow from those things, like eventually you are going to see growth happen.
I love that. Well, I want people to get your book. There's so much to talk about in the book. And kind of as we're getting, ready to end, I do think there's a couple other things that are important to say that really stood out to me. So many things, but you talk about having expectations, that because I think parents are scared to have expectations sometimes, or maybe the expectations are too high, or maybe then you kind of teeter to the other end where like don't have any. But you say that even if they're not happy, like it's good to have some expectations. And you talk about like activities and what an expectation should be a semester for that. So can you speak to that? Because I really thought that was something that our listeners need to hear.
Yeah. So thinking of expectations, almost like giving them some structure. Because if you don't have any structure for your teen, then most likely they are going to take the path of least resistance, which is going to be like maybe the bare minimum. Maybe it's just to get on their phone or to play video games, watch TV all day. And you want to give some structure, but you also want there to be some autonomy within that structure. So, what I recommend doing and what I talk about in the book is maybe you decide, like, okay, I want my kid to play one sport a semester and I want them involved in one club a semester, but they get to choose. They get to choose which sport it is and they get to choose which club. But so you set the parameters, you give them the expectation, and now let them choose how that's going to fit. It's kind of like the same thing with when they're learning to drive and they're starting to take the car out. You give some structure and you give guidelines and rules around driving the car, and then you let them figure out how they're going to make that work.
Yeah, I like that. I even did with my oldest. She didn't want to do any activities, and that was like really frustrating. So I said, "Okay, if you don't want to do anything at school, you have to get a job." And she actually did get one of those like early, I forget what it's called, work permits. So I think she was 15 and she worked at a shoe store. And that was a huge confidence booster for her. And then she did
Mhm.
get, she kept the job and she actually got involved in a school activity because I think that was what she needed to feel more confident, which you talk about also in the book. Like, find, and you tell all these stories, like you're about a client where maybe a teen girl, she was afraid to try something, but she had a little bit of success in this one area that then gave her confidence in another area. And yeah,
Mhm.
so building on that.
Yes, and I love the example of having them work because that is such a great way to adapt to the individual teen's needs. Because, yes, if they're so petrified to join a club or to play a sport, then okay, you found a way to adapt and to say, okay, well, instead of just saying, okay, you don't have to do anything, you're like, okay, well, you have to get a job. Or maybe it's you have to work at the family business or you have to volunteer somewhere, or you have to help out our, disabled neighbor, whatever it is, but finding some way to adapt so that they're still having to do something. You're still putting some expectation on them because you want them, when you have an expectation on your teen, you essentially are telling your child, like, I believe that you're capable. When a parent has no expectations and no structure for their kid, it's almost like saying, I don't think you can handle this. I think this is too hard for you. It's like a very subconscious message that gets sent.
Yeah, that's, yep, yep, that, yeah, I don't believe that you can do it or whatever that is. And they may, and what I like is you normalize, you may get pushback. They may complain. They may not like it, but that's okay. They probably won't.
That's,
Yeah.
yes, that's to be pretty much expected.
Yeah. Yeah. So what would, in, I want them to be able to find your book and you just share where to find you and all of that. And if they want to work with you. But do you have any like last words of something that we didn't cover that would be encouraging for parents to hear when it comes to supporting their kids?
Well, I know that parents are up against a lot these days, and it's especially now when we look at ChatGPT and the impact, where we see that kids are starting to rely on that and use that. And I know there's no way for parents to monitor that use, and same with social media. So I know that parents are really up against a lot, and it can feel very defeating, and just like, I don't even know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything. So I just encourage parents to start with whatever feels manageable to you. No matter what's going on with your teen, no matter what's going on at home, pick one little baby step that feels manageable to you, that it will help improve the dynamic or and help improve your teen's life, and just start with that baby step. Even if you're like, "Ugh, it's so insignificant, it's not going to make a difference." Just start there.
Yeah, the baby steps, like that's not insignificant, right? I
No.
think we jump ahead of wanting to see this specific outcome. We want to be there already, but it's baby steps and not to underestimate the importance of those baby steps.
Do
Even
not underestimate them. I have seen over and over again how those baby steps add up and create very significant and very monumental change. It just sometimes it takes time, and that is like completely okay.
yeah, and a big part of it, I do think I see such changes in the moms that I work with their kids just by the listening to and ask and paying attention, going to school on your kid. That alone and asking questions rather than just telling them makes a huge difference. Like one thing I use that you said in our interview, gosh, I don't know, that was like during the pandemic, I think, too, and we've done some other things, but was the first thing that we tend to do as parents when our kids come out of their room is hit them up with if they did their homework or their chores. that was what teenagers were telling you was one of their biggest complaints. That, I just want you to know, that's been so helpful that you shared that to tell parents that, because they're all like, "Oh, I totally do that." And it's like that's the first thing, like, "Did you get this done? Did you get that done?" And we just hit them up with all these questions. But to listen, create some space there. It takes time. Like, we just kind of have to calm ourselves down. So, yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm glad that was helpful. Thank you for telling me that.
Yeah, I just passed it along. So thank you. So tell them where to find you and what you're up to.
So the best place to find me is my website, which is drmelaniemcnally.com. So it's drmelaniemcnally.com. And you can, get in touch with me through my website and everything there. I'm also on Instagram quite a bit, which is at drmelaniemcnally.com, or at Dr. Melanie McNally for my Instagram. And currently I'm still doing one-on-one coaching with teens as well as with adults. I'm working on a new book. Um, I am running a few small groups with adults as well as with teens. So I've just got a lot of different things brewing right now.
And you do have some wonderful freebies on your website too. And so you go to the resources section and really good stuff, moms, to download there. So
Yes, I have quite a few freebies on there.
yeah, it's wonderful. Well, thank you, Melanie, so much. It was so fun to be with you again, and I so appreciate your wisdom and your understanding of teenagers and helping us to understand them better and support them better. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.